In the shopping center parking lot, I found my daughter huddled asleep in her minivan with my grandchildren, shivering in the cold. "Where's the 300,000 I gave for your bakery?" I demanded. She sobbed. "My husband and his fraudulent family stole every cent. Called me crazy," I thundered. "Pack your things. Revenge begins now." Before continuing, subscribe to the Cold Revenge channel, as the Sweet Revenge channel will soon cease to exist. Thank you for your attention. My name is Howard Cunningham. I'm 67 years old, and I've lived in Phoenix, Arizona for the past 42 years. Spent 4 decades as a certified fraud examiner, chasing down financial criminals who thought they were smarter than the system. I always believed that numbers don't lie, people do. That philosophy served me well in my career. What I didn't expect was that I'd need it to save my own family. It was a Saturday evening, and the Desert Sky Mall parking lot was packed with holiday shoppers. The air had that crisp desert chill, about 46 degrees, and Christmas lights twinkled across every storefront. I was there to pick up gifts for my grandkids, Jacob and Sophie. My daughter Rebecca had always made a big deal about Christmas, and I wanted to keep that tradition alive for the little ones. That's when I saw it. A blue Honda Odyssey parked in the far corner of the lot, away from the lights. Something about it caught my eye. The windows were fogged up, and there was a blanket pressed against the back window. I wouldn't have given it a second thought, except I recognized the dent on the rear bumper. Rebecca had backed into a shopping cart 3 months ago, and we'd laughed about it over the phone. My stomach dropped. I walked closer, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. Through the condensation on the window, I could make out shapes inside. My hand trembled as I knocked on the glass. The blanket shifted. A face appeared. Pale, exhausted, eyes red from crying. Rebecca. My daughter looked like she'd aged 10 years. Behind her, curled up on the back seat, were Jacob and Sophie, huddled together under a worn quilt I recognized from her college apartment. She unlocked the door. The smell hit me first, that stale, cramped odor of people living in a confined space. Fast food wrappers littered the floor. A gallon water jug sat in the cup holder. "Dad?" Her voice cracked. Then the tears came, and she couldn't stop them. I climbed into the passenger seat, my mind racing. Jacob stirred, his face gaunt and pale. Sophie's lips had a slight blue tinge. These kids were cold, hungry, living in a vehicle while Phoenix prepared for Christmas. How long? I kept my voice steady, but inside I was calculating, analyzing, already building a case. 11 days, Rebecca whispered, pulling the blanket tighter around the kids. We've been moving between parking lots. I didn't want security to notice. The bakery? I'd given her $300,000 8 months ago to open Sweet Haven Bakery. Her dream. She'd worked toward it for 5 years, perfecting recipes, building a business plan. I'd been so proud. Her face crumpled. Gone. All of it. Tracy and his family, they took everything. The business, the money, the house, everything. Tracy Walters, my son-in-law. I'd never quite trusted him, but Rebecca had been so happy. Handsome guy, charming smile, always knew exactly what to say. The kind of smooth talker I'd interrogated 100 times in my career. I should have seen it. Tell me what happened. Rebecca's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, scrolling through documents with numb fingers. 4 months ago, Tracy said we needed to restructure the business for tax purposes. He brought in his mother, Doreen, and his brother, Sean. Said they had experience with LLC formations. I trusted him. I signed papers. She showed me a document, her signature at the bottom, but the terms above it transferred complete ownership of Sweet Haven Bakery to Tracy Walters and Doreen Walters. No mention of Rebecca. I didn't read it carefully enough, she continued, her voice hollow. A month later, they locked me out. Changed the locks at the bakery. Changed our home security codes. When I confronted Tracy, he laughed. Said I'd voluntarily given him everything because I was mentally unstable. Mentally unstable? Ice formed in my chest. He had documents, Dad. Psychiatric evaluations from a Dr. Stevens, claiming I was suffering from delusions, paranoia, making me unfit to manage finances or make business decisions. The bank froze my accounts based on those reports. When I went to the police, they showed me the papers. Everything looked legal. Tracy's lawyer said if I caused trouble, they'd fight for full custody of the kids, claim I was an unfit mother. I looked at those children sleeping in the back of a minivan, 7 and 5 years old. Their father had done this to them. I was so ashamed, Rebecca sobbed. I couldn't face you. You'd given me that money, believed in me, and I'd lost it all. I thought I could fix it myself, get a job, find a place to stay, figure it out. But every apartment wanted first month, last month, deposit. I'm working part-time at a grocery store, but it's not enough. We've been staying here, trying to save up. I sat there in that freezing minivan, watching my daughter fall apart, watching my grandchildren shiver in their sleep. 40 years of catching financial predators, and I hadn't protected my own family. But something shifted in me then. The investigator in me woke up, cold and sharp. I knew exactly what Tracy and his family had done. I'd seen it 1,000 times. Forged documents, fabricated medical records, identity theft dressed up as legal paperwork. They'd made one critical mistake, though. They'd targeted someone who knew every trick in the book. I looked at Rebecca, and my voice came out harder than I'd intended. Gather your things. Revenge starts now. Her eyes widened. Dad, they have lawyers, documents. Everything's legal. Nothing about this is legal. I cut her off. I spent 40 years taking apart financial fraud schemes. Trust me, sweetheart. I know exactly what they did, and I know exactly how to prove it. I helped Rebecca pack their meager belongings, a duffel bag of clothes, the kids' favorite stuffed animals, a box of crackers. Jacob and Sophie barely woke up as I carried them to my car, one at a time. They were too thin, too exhausted, too used to instability. As I buckled Sophie into my back seat, wrapping her in the emergency blanket I kept in my trunk, something hardened in my chest. Tracy Walters thought he was clever, thought he'd found an easy target, thought an old man wouldn't fight back. He was about to learn what 4 decades of forensic accounting could do. I drove Rebecca and the kids to my house on East Saguaro Drive, my mind already assembling the pieces. Forged psychiatric records meant a fake doctor, traceable. LLC formation papers meant public records, analyzable. Bank account freezes meant documentation, obtainable. Every step they'd taken left a trail, and I knew how to follow it. Tracy and his family had made this personal. They'd put my grandchildren in danger, destroyed my daughter's dream, stolen my money. But worse than that, they'd assumed I was too old, too removed, too trusting to see through their scheme. That was their first mistake. And in my experience, the first mistake was just the beginning of the unraveling. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen watching Rebecca give the kids breakfast. Real breakfast. Eggs, toast, orange juice. Sophie ate like she hadn't seen food in days, which probably wasn't far from the truth. Jacob kept glancing at his mother, as if making sure she was still there. I'd spent most of the night in my office, the one Rebecca used to call my calculator museum. Vintage adding machines lined the shelves. A comptometer from 1915, a Burroughs from 1928, a Fraudulent from 1952. Each one represented an era of accounting, of tracking money, of catching people who thought they could hide their crimes in the numbers. Numbers never lie. That's what I'd learned over 40 years. People create elaborate stories, fake documents, even false identities. But money leaves traces. Always. I'd pulled Rebecca's papers from her bag and spread them across my desk. The LLC formation documents, the psychiatric evaluations, the bank freeze orders. I'd examined fraud for 4 decades, and this was amateur work dressed up in professional clothing. Sloppy, arrogant, exactly the kind of scheme that falls apart under scrutiny. But I needed more than my gut instinct. I needed proof. Dad? Rebecca appeared in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee. The kids are watching cartoons. I wanted to thank you. Don't thank me yet, I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Tell me about Tracy's family. How well do you know them? She sat down, her hands wrapped around the mug like it was the only warm thing in her world. Doreen, his mother, is intense, very protective of her sons. She never liked me, always made little comments about how I wasn't good enough for Tracy, how I came from simple people. She acted like my bakery was a cute hobby, not a real business. And the brother? Sean, he's younger, 34, works as a contractor, or at least that's what Tracy told me. I always thought he was involved in something shadier. He has this way of looking at people like he's calculating what they're worth. She paused. Actually, that whole family has that look. I knew that look. I'd seen it across interrogation tables, in courtrooms, in depositions. The look of people who see everyone else as marks, as resources to exploit. When did Tracy change? I asked. There must have been a time when he was different, when you fell in love with him. Rebecca's eyes went distant. 6 years ago when we met, he was wonderful, attentive, funny, supportive. When I talked about opening a bakery someday, he encouraged me, said he believed in my talent. After we got married and I got pregnant with Jacob, he was the perfect father. Or so I thought. What shifted? About 2 years ago, he started spending more time with Doreen and Sean. They'd have these long family meetings I wasn't invited to. He became secretive about money, started asking questions about your finances. How much was your pension? What was your house worth? Did you have savings? She looked up at me. I thought he was just trying to plan for our future. Now I realize he was calculating. There it was, the timeline. 2 years of planning, setting up the scheme, positioning themselves. Then 8 months ago, I'd given Rebecca the money for her bakery, and they'd sprung the trap. Tell me about Dr. Stevens, I said. I'd never heard of him until Tracy showed me the reports. Supposedly I'd been seeing him for 6 months, but I was never at any appointments. The reports were detailed, though, described symptoms I never had, conversations that never happened. When I tried to contact Dr. Stevens directly, the number was disconnected. Fake psychiatrist. That would be easy to trace. Medical licenses were public record. If this Stevens had lost his license or was operating fraudulently, that alone could unravel their case. I thought back to my first major case, 23 years ago. A real estate developer who'd created an elaborate Ponzi scheme, complete with fake appraisals, forged inspections, and fabricated tenant lists. He'd thought he was untouchable because the paperwork looked legitimate. It took me 3 weeks to trace the money, find the shell companies, prove that every document was manufactured. He got 15 years. Tracy and his family had used the same playbook, just applied it to a smaller target. They'd assumed that because Rebecca trusted Tracy, because she was focused on her business and her children, she wouldn't notice until it was too late. And they'd assumed that even if she did notice, she'd be too intimidated by their legal documentation to fight back. They hadn't counted on me. I called my doctor's office first thing Monday morning. Dr. Patricia Morris had been my physician for 12 years. I explained that my daughter needed an urgent psychiatric evaluation to establish her actual mental state. She squeezed us in that afternoon. The evaluation took 2 hours. Dr. Morris was thorough. Cognitive tests, psychological assessments, a detailed interview about Rebecca's history. When she finished, she looked at the forged Stevens reports and shook her head. "These are fabrications," she said flatly. "Your daughter shows no signs of the conditions described here. She's experiencing stress and trauma, which is completely understandable given her situation, but she's cognitively sound, emotionally stable, and fully capable of managing her own affairs." "Can you document that officially?" "I'll have a report ready by tomorrow. And Mr. Cunningham, whoever created these fake evaluations committed fraud. You should report this to the medical board and the police." Oh, I intended to, but not yet. Not until I had the complete picture. The following day, I sat in the 15th floor office of Lindsay Ford, an attorney specializing in family law and fraud cases. I'd found her through a colleague who'd retired from the Phoenix PD. She had a reputation for being thorough, aggressive, and expensive. I laid out Rebecca's documents on her glass desk. How much of this is legitimate? Lindsay spent 20 minutes examining the papers, making notes, cross-referencing dates. Finally, she looked up. The LLC formation is real, filed with the state, properly notarized. But the consent forms Rebecca supposedly signed? I'd bet my license these signatures were traced or forged. The psychiatric reports are obvious frauds, and the bank freeze was based on fraudulent documents, which means it's illegitimate. Can we fight this? We can dismantle it piece by piece, but it'll take time and money. These people set up a sophisticated scheme. We need to be more sophisticated in taking it apart. She smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. Lucky for your daughter, she has you. A certified fraud examiner with 40 years of experience. They picked the wrong family to con. I hired her on the spot. $5,000 retainer, but worth every penny. That afternoon, I hired George Bell, a private investigator I'd worked with on 3 previous cases. Former FBI, meticulous, and persistent. I gave him $350 up front and 3 targets: Tracy Walters, Doreen Walters, and Sean Walters. Photograph everything, I told him. Where they go, who they meet with, what they buy, especially financial transactions. I need to know if they're living beyond their means. On it, George said. These types always get sloppy once they think they've won. While George began surveillance, I made a personal visit to Wells Fargo, where Rebecca's accounts had been frozen. I'd done enough banking fraud investigations to know exactly how to approach this. I dressed in my old work suit, carried my briefcase, and asked to speak with the branch manager. Patricia Hughes was professional, cautious. I introduced myself as Rebecca's father and explained the situation calmly, methodically. I showed her Dr. Morris's evaluation, proving the psychiatric reports were fake. The freeze was implemented based on fraudulent documents, I said, which means the bank acted on false information provided by my daughter's husband. I'd like to understand the exact process by which this freeze was initiated. Hughes's expression shifted from defensive to concerned. Mr. Cunningham, if those psychiatric reports are indeed fraudulent, we have a serious problem. Let me pull the file. She disappeared for 15 minutes, then returned with a thick folder. The freeze was requested by Tracy Walters on August 15th. He provided the psychiatric evaluations, claimed his wife was making erratic financial decisions that endangered their children, and requested we lock the accounts for their protection. Did anyone verify these reports? We contacted the number listed for Dr. Stevens. Someone confirmed the reports were accurate. Someone, probably Sean or Doreen, playing the role of a medical office staff member. Classic fraud technique. I asked if I could record our conversation. Arizona is a one-party consent state, which meant I only needed my own permission. Hughes agreed. I now had documented proof that the bank freeze was based on false medical claims. 3 days later, George brought me photographs. Tracy and Sean at Dominic's Steakhouse, a high-end restaurant where entrees start at $60. Doreen purchasing a brand-new Lexus RX 350 for $52,000 in cash at a luxury dealership. Sean sporting a new Rolex. They were spending my money, flaunting it, not even trying to hide their newfound wealth. I sat in my office that evening studying the photos and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. I'd learned long ago that anger clouds judgment. This was colder, sharper. This was the feeling I got when I had a case locked down, when I knew exactly how to dismantle someone's carefully constructed lies. Tracy and his family thought they'd pulled off the perfect crime, stolen from a naive young woman, isolated her from help, created legal cover for their theft. They'd counted on her shame, her fear, her love for her children to keep her silent. But they'd forgotten one critical detail. Rebecca had a father who'd spent 4 decades hunting people exactly like them. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and began making notes. Dr. Stevens, fake psychiatrist, traceable through medical licensing boards, LLC documents, signatures could be analyzed by forensic handwriting experts, bank freeze, based on provably false information, the $300,000, somewhere in their accounts or converted to assets. Every piece of their scheme was built on lies, and lies always crumbled under examination. I thought about Jacob and Sophie, asleep upstairs in warm beds for the first time in almost 2 weeks. I thought about Rebecca, who'd cried herself to sleep, still convinced this was somehow her fault. Tracy Walters had made a calculation. He'd looked at my daughter and seen weakness. He'd looked at me and seen an old man who'd stay out of it. He'd calculated wrong. I smiled to myself in the dim light of my office, surrounded by antique calculators that had tracked a century of financial crimes. Tracy thought he was clever, but I'd taken apart schemes run by people far smarter than him. People with resources, connections, lawyers. They were all in prison now. Tracy and his family would join them. I just needed to be patient, methodical, and precise. The same qualities that had made me successful for 40 years. This wasn't about revenge, not really. This was about justice, about protecting my family, about making sure people who preyed on trust faced consequences. The game had begun. Tracy just didn't know he was already losing. 4 days after hiring Lindsay and George, I made the first official move. Lindsay filed a formal request with the court for all financial records of Sweet Haven Bakery. It was a surgical strike, perfectly legal, perfectly justified. If Tracy and his family had nothing to hide, they'd have no reason to worry, but they had everything to hide. That evening, my phone rang, Rebecca's number. I almost didn't answer. She was upstairs putting the kids to bed. Then I realized it was her old phone, the one Tracy controlled. "Rebecca, put your father on." Tracy's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. I gestured to Rebecca, who'd come downstairs. She paled when she saw the caller ID, but I put the phone on speaker and started recording. Arizona is a one-party consent state. I only needed my permission. "Speaking," I said calmly. "Listen, old man, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to back off. Rebecca signed over everything legally. We have documentation. All you're doing is wasting everyone's time and money." "Interesting," I said. "If everything's legitimate, why are you calling me? Surely legitimate business people welcome transparency." "You think you're clever, running to lawyers, filing pointless motions?" His voice rose. "You're embarrassing Rebecca. She's unstable. The doctors said so. All you're proving is that mental illness runs in the family." Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. I covered the phone and mouthed, "Keep listening. Tracy, you made 3 mistakes in that sentence alone. First, you're acknowledging you know about the court filing. I wonder how you found out so quickly. Second, you're confirming there are doctors involved, which we'll be very interested in verifying. Third, you just threatened and insulted both me and my daughter on a recorded line." I paused. "Would you like to make it 4 mistakes, or should we end this conversation?" The silence stretched for 5 seconds. Then, "You have all the papers, all the signatures. You have nothing." "We'll see," I said. "Thanks for the call, Tracy. This recording will be very useful." He hung up. Rebecca stared at me. "Dad, you recorded that?" "Every word. He just gave us evidence of harassment and admission that he's monitoring court filings. That's not behavior of someone with nothing to hide." I saved the file, backed it up twice. "He's scared, sweetheart. Scared people make mistakes." 3 days before Christmas, Lindsay called with news. "Howard, you're going to love this. I ran Dr. Stevens' license through the state medical board. His license was revoked 2 years ago for selling fake psychiatric evaluations to lawyers in custody cases. He was fined $75,000 and faced potential criminal charges, but they couldn't prove conspiracy. He's been operating under the table ever since. So Rebecca's psychiatric reports are worthless. Worse than worthless, they're evidence of fraud. I've already filed a complaint with the medical board and forwarded everything to the district attorney's office. This isn't just civil fraud anymore, Howard. This could become criminal." I felt that cold satisfaction again. Tracy and his family had built their scheme on a foundation of lies, and I was pulling out the support beams one by one. The day after Christmas, I drove to Sweet Haven Bakery. The location on North Scottsdale Road had been Rebecca's dream. Good foot traffic, visible from the street, close to upscale neighborhoods. She'd spent months designing the interior, choosing equipment, developing recipes. The place looked abandoned. One employee, a young woman probably 22, stood behind an empty display case. The smell of fresh bread was gone, replaced by the staleness of disuse. "Can I help you?" She sounded exhausted. "Just browsing," I said, looking around. The custom ovens Rebecca had bought for $18,000 sat cold. The espresso machine, another $4,000, was dusty. "How's business?" She laughed bitterly. "What business?" "The new owners don't care. They come in once a week to check the register, but they don't bake anything. I'm the only one here, and they're 3 weeks behind on my paycheck. I'm quitting next week." "The previous owner," I said carefully. "Rebecca Cunningham. Did you work for her?" Her face softened. "Rebecca was amazing. She taught me everything about pastry. When she left, or whatever happened, nobody explains anything to me. The whole place fell apart. These new people, the Walters family, they don't know the first thing about running a bakery." "Mind if I buy something?" "Sure, if you want day-old croissants. That's all we have." I bought one for $4.50, paid cash. Kept the receipt. The croissant was hard as a rock. Rebecca would have been mortified to sell it. I threw it away in my car and drove home with one more piece of evidence. Tracy and his family had stolen a thriving business and run it into the ground within months. They'd never intended to operate it. They just wanted to extract the money. That evening, George Bell called. "Howard, you need to see these photos." 20 minutes later, he was at my house, spreading surveillance images across my dining room table. Tracy and Sean at different Chase Bank locations all on the same day. Same pattern at each. Walk in, withdraw cash, leave. I checked the timestamps. George said, Tracy hit 3 branches within 4 hours. Sean hit 2. Each withdrawal was $9,500. I felt my pulse quicken. Structuring. Exactly. They're staying under the $10,000 reporting threshold to avoid triggering automatic reports to FinCEN. George pulled out another photo. And look at this. Doreen Walters at a Lexus dealership signing papers. The salesman was handing her keys to a brand new RX 350. She paid cash, George said, $52,000. My contact at the dealership confirmed it. I studied the photo. Doreen looked triumphant, victorious. She was spending my money, the money I'd given Rebecca to build her dream, and she felt no shame, just entitlement. Keep watching them, I said. I want to know every purchase, every transaction, every movement. New Year's Eve arrived. Rebecca was trying to be cheerful for Jacob and Sophie, but I could see the weight on her shoulders. At midnight, we watched fireworks from my back porch, modest ones, neighborhood displays. The kids were asleep by then, exhausted from the day. "Dad," Rebecca said quietly, "do you really think we can win? Tracy has lawyers, documents, everything looks legal." I looked at her. "Rebecca, I've spent 4 decades dismantling fraud schemes. The more elaborate the fraud, the more evidence they leave behind. Tracy and his family think they're clever, but they're amateurs. They've already made a dozen mistakes, and they don't even know it." "What mistakes?" "The fake psychiatrist with a revoked license, the structured cash withdrawals, the recorded phone call where Tracy admitted he's monitoring court filings, the bakery running into the ground, proving they never intended to operate it legitimately, the luxury purchases right after stealing your money." I counted on my fingers. "Every move they make gives us more ammunition." She was quiet for a moment. "You sound different. Harder." "I am different. When I found you in that minivan, something changed. These people hurt my family. I don't forgive that." I put my arm around her shoulders. "But I don't lose my temper. I stay calm, methodical, patient. That's what makes me dangerous to people like Tracy." As the last fireworks faded, I thought about the year ahead. 2025. Rebecca was right. I was harder now. The investigator I'd been for 40 years had come out of retirement, but this time it was personal. This time it was my daughter, my grandchildren, my money. Tracy and his family had counted on shame, fear, and confusion to keep Rebecca silent. They'd counted on me being too old, too distant, too trusting to fight back. They'd miscalculated badly. I watched the Phoenix skyline light up with celebrations and felt no joy, no festivity, just cold determination. The war had begun, and I intended to win every battle. The court documents arrived on the 2nd day of January, 347 pages of financial records for Sweet Haven Bakery, covering the past 6 months. I cleared my desk, made fresh coffee, and settled in for the work I knew best, following the money. By page 12, I knew we had them. The transfers were blatant once you knew what to look for. Money from Sweet Haven's operating account flowing to 5 different LLCs. Desert Investment Group, Cactus Properties Holdings, SW Consulting Services, Walters Family Trust, and Phoenix Trading Associates. The amounts varied, sometimes $12,000, sometimes $38,000, once $62,000, but the pattern was unmistakable. I pulled up Arizona's corporate registry website and started cross-referencing. Desert Investment Group, registered June 14th, managing member Doreen Walters. Cactus Properties Holdings, June 28th, managing member Sean Walters. SW Consulting Services, July 9th, managing member Tracy Walters. All registered within 2 months of each other. All registered after I'd given Rebecca the money for her bakery. All set up before Tracy locked her out of the business. This wasn't impulse. This was premeditation. I spent 6 hours building a spreadsheet, tracking every dollar. The total came to $287,340. Nearly all of the money I'd given Rebecca, systematically drained through a network of shell companies. It was elegant, in a criminal way. Each LLC could claim to be a legitimate vendor, consulting services, property management, investment advice. On paper, it looked like Sweet Haven was paying for business services. But when you checked the actual services rendered, there was nothing. No contracts, no invoices, no work product, just money disappearing into accounts controlled by the Walters family. I sat back and allowed myself a grim smile. They'd created a textbook money laundering scheme and documented every step. 4 days later, I had a meeting with Detective Carla Mitchell from the Phoenix PD's Economic Crimes Division. Lindsay had arranged the introduction, calling in a favor from her days as a prosecutor. Mitchell was 41, sharp-eyed, with the wary competence of someone who'd seen every scam in the book. She studied my spreadsheets for 3 hours without speaking, occasionally making notes or cross-referencing documents. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Cunningham, this is serious. We're not talking about a domestic dispute over money. This is organized fraud, shell companies, structured transactions, falsified documents. If your analysis is correct, and I believe it is, we're looking at multiple felonies. What's the next step? I need to verify everything independently, but if it holds up, I'll recommend the Maricopa County District Attorney open a criminal investigation." She paused. "You should know. This could take months. Financial crimes are complicated. Building a prosecutable case requires meticulous work." "I have time," I said, "and patience." "I can see that." She gathered the documents. "Keep collecting evidence. Anything new, send it to me. And Mr. Cunningham, in my 15 years doing this, I've rarely seen such thorough preliminary work. You missed your calling as a detective." I smiled. I caught plenty of criminals in my career, just from the accounting side. The following week, I used a connection I'd cultivated over 4 decades. Tom Richardson worked in the IRS field office in Phoenix. We'd collaborated on 3 cases back in my consulting days. He provided tax fraud evidence. I provided forensic accounting. He'd since risen to senior investigator status. I called him on a Wednesday afternoon. "Tom, it's Howard Cunningham. I need advice on a personal matter." "Howard, haven't heard from you in years. What's going on?" I explained the situation in broad strokes. Rebecca, the bakery, the shell companies. "Here's my question. If money moved through 5 LLCs, but none of them filed tax returns, what does that tell you?" "That someone's about to have a very bad day with the IRS." I could hear him typing. "Howard, you're describing tax evasion. If $287,000 moved through entities without being reported, that's serious exposure. Criminal exposure. How serious? Jail time, serious. The IRS doesn't mess around with unreported income, especially when there's evidence of deliberate structuring to avoid detection." More typing. "You want me to look into this officially?" "Not yet, but I wanted to know the potential consequences before I proceed." "Smart. Keep documenting everything. When you're ready to move forward, call me. We'll open an investigation." I thanked him and hung up. Another front in the war had opened. Tracy and his family weren't just facing civil lawsuits and potential criminal fraud charges. They were facing the IRS, and in America, the IRS always wins. Mid-January brought an unexpected development. Tracy showed up at my house. I was in my office when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw his BMW in my driveway. Interesting. He was coming to me now. I opened the door. Tracy stood there, dressed in an expensive suit I probably paid for, trying to project confidence but failing. There was tension in his jaw, uncertainty in his eyes. "We need to talk," he said. "Come in." I led him to the living room, deliberately not offering coffee or any hospitality. "What brings you here, Tracy?" He sat on the edge of the couch, uncomfortable. "Look, I know there's been some misunderstanding about the bakery. Rebecca and I had an agreement, and maybe the paperwork wasn't as clear as it should have been. But this legal action, it's getting out of hand. It's expensive for everyone." I almost laughed. He was trying to negotiate. "Define misunderstanding." "The business restructuring." Rebecca agreed to transfer ownership for tax purposes. It was all legitimate, but maybe she didn't fully understand the implications. You know how she is, creative, but not great with financial details. There it was, the subtle condescension, the implication that Rebecca was incompetent. I'd heard this tone in interrogations before, criminals trying to rewrite history, casting themselves as reasonable and their victims as confused. Tracy, let me save us both some time. I leaned forward. I know about the shell companies, all 5 of them. I know about the structured cash withdrawals, $9,500, 3 times in one day. I know Dr. Stevens lost his medical license 2 years ago. I have recordings of you admitting to monitoring court filings and harassing my daughter. And I have evidence that you've been planning this since before you married Rebecca. His face went white. Actually white. I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. Fight or flight, deny or deflect. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Don't I? Here's what I know for certain. Structuring cash transactions to avoid federal reporting requirements is a felony. 5 years in prison. Using falsified medical documents to commit fraud is a felony. Creating shell companies to launder money is a felony. Shall I continue? Tracy stood up abruptly. You're bluffing. You're a retired accountant playing detective. You have nothing that would hold up in court. I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Tracy, I spent 40 years as a certified fraud examiner. I've testified as an expert witness in 63 cases. My analysis has sent 22 people to prison. You've made every classic mistake that amateur fraudsters make. Overconfidence, poor documentation, greed. You thought you were clever. You're not. He moved toward the door, trying to recover his composure. This isn't over, old man. We have lawyers, too. By all means, hire the best lawyers money can buy. My money, technically, since you stole it from my daughter. I look forward to seeing them in court. After he left, I sat in the quiet of my living room and thought about how satisfying that had been. Not the confrontation itself. I didn't need that kind of validation. But watching Tracy realize that he'd underestimated me, that his perfect scheme was unraveling, that someone was actually going to hold him accountable. That was worth the wait. Rebecca came downstairs, having watched from the top of the stairs. Dad, you were terrifying. Good. Fear is what people like Tracy understand. I stood up and stretched. He came here thinking he could intimidate me or negotiate. Instead, he confirmed everything we suspected, and he left knowing that I'm not backing down. What happens next? Next, we keep building the case. Detective Mitchell is investigating. Tom at the IRS is ready to move when we give the word. Lindsay is preparing civil suits, and George is still watching them, documenting every purchase, every meeting, every mistake. I looked at my daughter. They stole from you, Rebecca. They put my grandchildren in danger. They tried to destroy your reputation and your life. I'm going to make sure they pay for every bit of it. She hugged me, and I felt her trembling slightly. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, but you're safe now. And I promise you, by the time this is over, you'll have your bakery back, your money back, and your life back. As she went back upstairs, I returned to my office and looked at the wall of evidence I'd been building. Photos from George's surveillance, financial documents, recorded phone calls, expert evaluations, legal filings. It looked like what it was, a prosecutorial case board. Tracy thought this was a family dispute, a civil matter. He was wrong. This was a criminal investigation, and he was the target. He just didn't know it yet. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and started sketching the next phase of the plan. We had the evidence. Now we needed the strategy, how to deploy it, when to strike, how to maximize the impact. I'd spent 40 years studying how fraud schemes collapse. The pattern was always the same. Overconfidence leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to exposure. Exposure leads to panic. Panic leads to more mistakes. Tracy and his family were right on schedule, and I was just getting started. 3 days after Tracy's failed intimidation visit, the Walters family struck back. Lindsay called me early morning. Howard, they've lawyered up. Big time. Marcus Gray, he's a defense attorney who specializes in aggressive tactics. He's filed a countersuit against Rebecca for defamation and unlawful accusations. They're demanding $500,000 in damages. I felt a familiar coldness settle over me. Let me guess, they're also seeking a restraining order? You've seen this playbook before. Lindsay sounded tired. They want Rebecca barred from approaching the bakery or contacting any employees. It's standard intimidation. They're trying to bury us in legal fees and force a settlement. When's the hearing? 2 weeks. February 4th at Phoenix Superior Court. She paused. Howard, Gray is expensive. The fact that they can afford him means they're willing to spend significant money on defense. This could get costly for us, too. I thought about my savings. $127,000 accumulated over 40 years of careful living. Lindsay, I'll pay whatever it takes. They put my grandchildren in danger. I don't care if it costs every penny I have. I was hoping you'd say that, because we're going to need expert witnesses, depositions, document analysis. Whatever you need. But Lindsay, we're not settling. We're taking this all the way. The next week brought another development. George Bell called with urgency in his voice. Howard, Sean Walters just bought a one-way ticket to Cabo San Lucas. Departure date is February 10th. My hand tightened on the phone. They're running. Looks that way. Flight's already paid for. Cash, naturally. Want me to keep digging? Yes. And I'm calling Detective Mitchell. If they're preparing to flee, that changes everything. Carla Mitchell moved fast. Within 2 days, she'd filed a motion with the court designating all three Walters as persons of interest in an active fraud investigation. The travel restriction came through the following afternoon. None of them could leave Maricopa County without court permission. I imagined Sean's face when he tried to board that flight and found his passport flagged. Small victories, but satisfying ones. Then came the breakthrough I hadn't expected. Rebecca's phone rang while we were having dinner. She glanced at the screen and went pale. It's Jennifer Brown. She used to work at the bakery. I haven't talked to her in months. Answer it, I said, already reaching for my recording device. Rebecca put it on speaker. Jennifer? Rebecca, I need to tell you something. I should have said this months ago, but I was scared. Jennifer's voice was shaking. I saw what they did. Tracy and his mother, they met with that psychiatrist in July, at a coffee shop on Camelback Road. I was at the next table, and I heard everything. I leaned forward. This is Rebecca's father, Howard. Jennifer, can you tell us exactly what you heard? Dr. Stevens, or whatever his name really is, he was negotiating payment for fake psychiatric reports. Doreen offered him $15,000 in cash to write evaluations saying Rebecca was mentally unstable. Tracy showed him documents they'd need him to backdate. They were planning the whole thing, deciding what symptoms to include, what medications to recommend. It was so calculated, so cold. Rebecca, I'm so sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Rebecca was crying silently. I kept my voice steady. Jennifer, would you be willing to give a sworn statement about what you witnessed? Yes, that's why I'm calling. I can't stay quiet anymore. What they did to Rebecca, she didn't deserve that. We met Jennifer 2 days later at Lindsay's office. She signed an affidavit detailing everything she'd witnessed. The meeting, the cash payment, Tracy's instructions to Stevens about specific diagnoses. It was the missing piece, the eyewitness testimony that transformed our case from circumstantial to ironclad. This is explosive, Lindsay said after Jennifer left. We have a witness to the conspiracy. This isn't just fraud anymore. This is premeditated criminal activity with multiple participants. I spent the night before the court hearing in my office building what I did best, a comprehensive financial analysis. 47 pages of charts, graphs, transaction timelines, and forensic accounting that traced every dollar from Rebecca's bakery account through the maze of shell companies. Each LLC was dissected, registration dates, managing members, bank accounts, transfers. The pattern was unmistakable, and the evidence was overwhelming. I finished at 4:37 in the morning, printed 3 copies, and sat back in my chair. The antique calculators on my shelves seemed to watch approvingly. These machines had tallied numbers for a century, catching mistakes and exposing lies. I was doing the same thing, just with modern tools. Tomorrow, Marcus Gray and the Walters family would see exactly what they were up against. I allowed myself a thin smile. Tracy had called this a circus. He was right about one thing. This was a show. But I was the one writing the script, and the finale was going to be spectacular. Rebecca came downstairs and found me at my desk. "Dad, you haven't slept." "Couldn't. Too much to prepare." I gestured at the report. "But it's done. Everything they did, every transaction, every lie, it's all here, documented and cross-referenced." She picked up the report, flipping through pages of financial analysis. "I don't understand half of this." "You don't need to. The judge will. And when she does, the Walters family is going to realize they made a catastrophic mistake." I stood up, stretching my back. They thought they could hide behind paperwork and intimidation. They forgot that paperwork is exactly what I'm good at. "What happens if we lose?" I looked at my daughter, still fragile, still healing, but stronger than she'd been a month ago. "We won't lose, because the truth is on our side, and I have 40 years of experience making truth visible through numbers. Get some rest, sweetheart. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." After she went back upstairs, I returned to my desk one more time. I opened my email and sent the final version of my report to Lindsay, copying Detective Mitchell and Tom Richardson at the IRS. 3 separate investigations, all converging on the same target. The Walters family had built their scheme carefully, layer by layer. I was dismantling it the same way, methodically, thoroughly, with attention to every detail. And tomorrow, in a Phoenix courtroom, they'd begin to understand what happens when you steal from a fraud examiner's family. The courtroom in Phoenix Superior Court was more crowded than I'd expected. Marcus Gray had brought an entourage, 2 associate attorneys and a paralegal carrying 3 briefcases. The Walters family sat behind them. Tracy in an expensive suit, Doreen in pearls that probably cost more than Rebecca's monthly grocery budget, and Sean looking uncomfortable in anything more formal than jeans. They projected confidence, money, power. I sat next to Rebecca and Lindsay, wearing my 20-year-old court suit and carrying a single leather folder. Let them underestimate me. It would make this sweeter. Judge Patricia Simmons entered, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for suffering no nonsense. She'd been on the bench for 18 years, and Lindsay had assured me she was fair but demanding. Marcus Gray stood first, and I had to admit he was good. Smooth voice, practiced gestures, the kind of lawyer who'd convince juries to doubt their own eyes. "Your Honor, this is a tragic case of family dysfunction being weaponized through the legal system. My clients, the Walters family, legally restructured a failing business to protect their investment and provide for their children. Ms. Cunningham's mental health struggles are well documented by licensed medical professionals. Rather than accepting help, she and her father have launched a campaign of harassment and false accusations. We're asking the court to dismiss these frivolous claims and award my clients $500,000 for the reputational damage they've suffered." He sat down, looking satisfied. Tracy leaned over and whispered something to Doreen. She nodded, her face smug. Lindsay stood. "Your Honor, may I present evidence?" "Proceed." Lindsay handed the clerk my 47-page report, Jennifer Brown's sworn affidavit, and the recorded phone conversations. The judge accepted them without comment and began reading. The courtroom went silent. I watched the clock. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Judge Simmons' expression gradually changed from neutral to something harder. Her eyebrows drew together. Her jaw tightened. At the 20-minute mark, she looked up. Her eyes found Marcus Gray. "Mr. Gray, I've reviewed the materials submitted by the plaintiff. This analysis documents structured cash withdrawals, designed to circumvent federal reporting requirements. It shows 5 limited liability companies registered within a 2-month period, all controlled by your clients, with no legitimate business purpose. It demonstrates systematic extraction of $287,000 from the bakery account through these shell entities." She paused. "And this affidavit describes your clients conspiring with an unlicensed medical practitioner to fabricate psychiatric evaluations for the purpose of fraud." Gray's face lost color. Not dramatically, just a subtle draining that made his expensive tan look sickly. "Your Honor, this is simply one interpretation." "This is forensic accounting, Mr. Gray. These aren't interpretations. These are bank records, corporate filings, and eyewitness testimony." Judge Simmons looked at the Walters family. "I'm referring this matter to the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy charges. Doreen's hand flew to her throat. Tracy's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sean started to stand, then sat back down heavily. I watched each reaction, cataloging them. This was the moment when they realized their scheme was unraveling. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order, freezing all assets of Sweet Haven Bakery and the 5 associated LLCs pending investigation. Neither party may access these accounts until this matter is resolved. She looked at Gray. Your countersuit is dismissed with prejudice. If you want to appeal that decision, you're welcome to try, but I wouldn't recommend it. Gray stood slowly. Your Honor, my clients have significant assets which they'll need for their legal defense, I imagine. This hearing is adjourned. Next court date is March 3rd. The gavel came down. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the Walters family erupted in whispered panic. Tracy grabbed Gray's arm, talking urgently. Doreen's face had gone from smug to stricken in seconds. Sean just stared at the judge like she'd announced the world was ending. We filed out of the courtroom. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I felt the satisfaction of watching dominoes fall exactly as I'd arranged them. Outside, Lindsay pulled me aside. Howard, that was incredible. I've never seen Patricia Simmons react that strongly to evidence. Your report was airtight. It was accurate. That's all that matters. But I allowed myself a small smile. How long until the DA's office responds? Days, maybe a week. With evidence this solid, they'll move fast. 3 days later, Detective Mitchell called. Howard, the Maricopa County District Attorney, has officially opened a criminal investigation into the Walters family. We're looking at fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and financial structuring charges. All 3 of them? All 3. Tracy's looking at the most serious charges. 11 counts total. Doreen and Sean are accessories. But they're facing prison time, too. She paused. I need to ask, where'd you get this level of detail? This forensic work is better than most of what our own analysts produce. I told you, I spent 40 years doing exactly this. Well, it shows. The DA wants your report for the criminal case. You might be called as an expert witness. I'll testify. I felt that cold satisfaction again. Gladly. A week later, George called with an update. Tracy tried to access the frozen accounts. Went to 3 different banks. Got turned away at each one. Security footage shows him getting increasingly agitated. At the last bank, he started yelling at the manager before security escorted him out. Desperation, I said. They're realizing they can't access their stolen money. It gets better. Doreen paid their lawyer's retainer with the last of their liquid cash, $34,000. They're running out of resources fast. By mid-February, the IRS entered the picture. Tom Richardson called from his office. Howard, we've opened an official investigation into tax evasion. Those 5 LLCs never filed returns despite moving $287,000 through their accounts. We're looking at $94,000 in unpaid taxes plus penalties. How does this work with the criminal investigation? Parallel tracks. The DA handles the fraud and forgery charges. We handle the tax crimes. Both can result in prison time, and the penalties stack. He laughed without humor. Your son-in-law picked the wrong father-in-law to steal from. He picked the wrong daughter, I corrected. I'm just making sure he pays for it. The final blow came unexpectedly. Sean Walters was arrested for attempting to destroy evidence. A neighbor had seen him burning documents in his backyard and called the fire department. The responding firefighters noticed partially burned financial papers and called the police. Detective Mitchell's team recovered enough charred documents to identify them as bank statements and LLC formation papers. Sean posted bail, $25,000 that Doreen scraped together from their dwindling cash reserves. But now he faced additional charges of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. I sat in my office that evening looking at the wall where I'd been tracking the case. The Walters family's empire was collapsing. Their accounts were frozen. Their lawyer was expensive. Their criminal charges were mounting, and they still had 2 more court dates before the actual trial. Rebecca came in with coffee. Dad, Lindsay called. She said the DA officially filed criminal charges today. Tracy faces 11 counts, Doreen 5, Sean 4. I heard 20 counts total across the 3 of them. Is it really going to end? Are they actually going to face consequences? I looked at my daughter. She was sleeping better now, eating regularly. spending time with Jacob and Sophie without constant fear. The transformation from the broken woman in the minivan was remarkable. Yes, I said, they're going to face consequences. And Rebecca? We're going to make sure you get everything back. The bakery, the money, your reputation, all of it. She hugged me, and I felt her trembling slightly. Relief, I thought. Or maybe residual fear. Either way, I held her and thought about justice. The Walters family had spent months building their scheme. I'd spent weeks dismantling it, and I wasn't finished yet. The second court hearing arrived the following week. The prosecutor from the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office, a sharp woman named Elena Rodriguez, stood before Judge Simmons with a stack of formal charging documents. Your Honor, the state of Arizona is filing criminal charges against Tracy Walters, Doreen Walters, and Sean Walters. Tracy Walters faces 7 counts of fraud, 3 counts of forgery, and 1 count of financial structuring. Doreen Walters faces 4 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud and 1 count of forgery. Sean Walters faces 3 counts of fraud and 1 count of obstruction of justice. I watched Marcus Gray try to negotiate. Your Honor, my clients are willing to make restitution arrangements. Perhaps we can discuss a plea agreement. Mr. Gray, your clients allegedly stole $287,000 through an elaborate fraud scheme involving shell companies, forged documents, and fabricated medical records. The state is not interested in plea deals at this time. Judge Simmons looked at the Walters family. Trial is set for April 15th. Bail is set at $75,000 each. Doreen's face went ashen. That was $225,000 total. Money they didn't have anymore since their accounts were frozen. They spent that night in county lockup before Doreen's sister posted bail using her house as collateral. Another family member dragged into their mess. But while the legal machinery ground forward, I was executing something more immediate. I'd been thinking about the bakery, Sweet Haven, Rebecca's dream that they'd stolen and left to rot. The Walters family didn't care about operating it. They'd only wanted the money, which meant they'd been ignoring little details, like rent. I made some calls. Thomas Richardson owned the commercial property at 2156 North Scottsdale Road. He was 58, semi-retired, and increasingly frustrated with tenants who didn't pay on time. We met at a coffee shop in Scottsdale. Richardson was a straightforward man, former construction worker who'd bought properties over 30 years and now lived off the rental income. Mr. Richardson, I understand the Walters family is behind on rent for Sweet Haven Bakery. He grimaced. 3 months. $18,750. I've been trying to get hold of them, but they dodge my calls. I'm preparing eviction papers. What if I paid the back rent? Plus $6,000 on top as a goodwill gesture? His eyebrows rose. $24,750 total? Why would you do that? Because that bakery was built by my daughter, Rebecca Cunningham. The Walters family stole it from her through fraud. There's an active criminal investigation. If you evict them for non-payment, I'd like you to offer the lease to Rebecca instead. Same terms, same location. Legally, through proper channels. Richardson leaned back, studying me. I heard something about legal troubles. The sheriff's office called, asking about the property. He was quiet for a moment. Your daughter? She the one who used to bake those amazing sourdough loaves? She is. I bought bread there twice. Best I've ever had. He extended his hand. You've got a deal, Mr. Cunningham. I'll file the eviction today. 5 days later, Lindsay served the Walters family with eviction notices. They had 48 hours to vacate the premises. Tracy called me, his voice vibrating with rage. You can't do this. That's our business. Actually, it's not. You don't own the building, and you haven't paid rent in 3 months. Mr. Richardson has every legal right to evict you for non-payment. This is you. You're behind this. I'm just helping a legitimate businessman collect what he's owed. Not my fault you were too busy spending stolen money to pay your bills. I let the satisfaction creep into my voice. You know what they say, Tracy. When you don't pay rent, you get evicted. Basic capitalism. He hung up. I smiled. The morning of the eviction, I drove Rebecca to the bakery. A Maricopa County Sheriff's deputy was already there, along with a locksmith Lindsay had arranged. The Walters family was inside. I could see them through the window, moving frantically. The deputy knocked. This is the sheriff's office. You have a court order to vacate these premises immediately. Open the door, or I'll authorize the locksmith to change the locks with you inside." The door opened. Tracy stood there, his face a mask of fury. Behind him, Doreen looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past month. Sean was nowhere to be seen, probably still dealing with his own legal problems. "You're making a mistake," Tracy said to the deputy. "This property was fraudulently taken from us. I have a court order signed by a judge. You can dispute it through proper legal channels, but right now you're trespassing." The deputy was professional, but firm. "You have 10 minutes to collect any personal belongings. Everything else stays." Tracy's eyes found me standing behind the deputy. "You think you've won? You think this is over?" I stepped forward, keeping my voice level. "I think you're being evicted for non-payment of rent. I think you're facing 11 criminal charges. I think the IRS is investigating you for tax evasion, and I think my daughter is getting her business back." I paused. "So yes, Tracy, I think I've won." His face went from red to purple. Doreen put a hand on his arm, pulling him back. "Tracy, we need to leave." They collected a few personal items, some papers, a jacket, Doreen's purse. Then they walked out, defeated. The locksmith immediately began changing the locks. Rebecca stood frozen, staring at the bakery. "Dad, is this real?" "The lease is being transferred to your name as we speak. The rent's paid through June. It's yours again, sweetheart." She burst into tears, but this time they were good tears. Relief, joy, hope. The deputy handed her the new keys. "Congratulations, ma'am. Place is all yours." I watched Rebecca walk through her bakery, touching the equipment she'd chosen, the walls she'd painted, the counter where she'd planned to serve customers. 7 months since Tracy had stolen it. 7 months of her life destroyed. But now she had it back, and I had done it through the simplest possible method, paying someone else's debt. No dramatic confrontation, no complex legal maneuvering, just cold, practical justice. Tracy had been so focused on the criminal charges and frozen accounts that he'd forgotten about basic bills. Amateur mistake. The kind of thing I'd seen 100 times in fraud cases. Criminals get so confident in their scheme that they stop paying attention to the boring details. Details like rent. As we left the bakery that evening, Rebecca squeezed my hand. "I still can't believe this is happening." "Believe it. Tomorrow we start hiring staff. Next week we get the ovens running again. And in a month, Sweet Haven Bakery will be exactly what you dreamed it would be." She smiled, a real smile, the first I'd seen since finding her in that parking lot. "What about the trial?" "The trial's in 4 weeks. By then you'll be baking again. The kids will be settled, and the Walters family will be watching everything they built collapse." I looked at the bakery sign, illuminated by street lights. "They took 7 months from you. I'm making sure they lose everything." 4 days after Rebecca reclaimed the bakery, the IRS struck. Tom Richardson called me early in the morning. "Howard, the tax liens are being filed today. $94,670 in unpaid taxes plus penalties. We're freezing everything. The house in Scottsdale, both vehicles, all remaining bank accounts." "What happens to the house?" "Forced sale if they can't pay within 90 days. Which they can't, since all their liquid assets are already frozen by the criminal court." He paused. "This family is done, Howard. Financially, they're destroyed." I felt no sympathy. They'd destroyed Rebecca financially, put my grandchildren on the street. This was proportional justice. The same day, George Bell brought me something interesting. "Howard, remember I've been monitoring their emails? I found correspondence with an offshore banking consultant in the Cayman Islands, dated last October, a month before they stole from Rebecca." I examined the emails. Tracy and Doreen had been planning to move money offshore before they'd even executed the fraud. Premeditation, evidence of criminal intent from the very beginning. Send this to Detective Mitchell and the prosecutor immediately. This proves they planned everything in advance. Already done. Mitchell said it's the final nail in the coffin. The prosecutor's adding aggravating circumstances to the charges. A week later, Marcus Gray withdrew from the case. Lindsay told me about it over the phone, barely containing her amusement. "Howard, Gray went to Doreen's house this morning and told her he couldn't represent them anymore. Apparently, he said, and I quote, 'I can't defend what's indefensible. You've lied to me from the beginning. Find another attorney.' So they're unrepresented with 3 weeks until trial? They hired someone, David Powell. Young guy, public defender type who went private but takes cheap cases. They paid him $8,000, probably the last cash they had. $8,000 for a lawyer to defend against 20 criminal counts. The Walters family was scraping the bottom of the barrel, but they weren't finished trying. Late one evening, my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered cautiously. Mr. Cunningham, it's Tracy. His voice was different, smaller, desperate. I need to talk to you, please. I'm listening. Can we meet? In person? There's a coffee shop near the courthouse. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I recorded the conversation on my phone before I even left the house. Tracy looked terrible. Unshaven, circles under his eyes, wearing a wrinkled shirt. The charming confidence was gone, replaced by barely controlled panic. Thank you for coming, he said as I sat down. You have 5 minutes. Howard, Mr. Cunningham. I was wrong. About everything. I know what I did to Rebecca, to you, to the kids. It was terrible. Unforgivable. He leaned forward. But please, I'm begging you. Talk to the prosecutor. Ask them to drop the charges. We'll pay back every penny. We'll sign over everything. Just please, don't send us to prison. I studied him. This was the man who'd put my daughter and grandchildren in a minivan in December, who'd spent my money on luxury cars and expensive dinners, who'd called Rebecca crazy and unstable to justify stealing from her. Tracy, do you remember what you said to Rebecca when she confronted you about the money? He shook his head, confused. You told her she was nothing, that you had all the papers, all the signatures, and she couldn't do anything about it. I kept my voice even. Do you remember last December, when my daughter was sleeping in her van with 2 small children in 40-degree weather? I didn't know. You knew exactly where she was. You'd frozen her bank accounts, stolen her business, taken her home. You knew she had nowhere to go. I stood up. I'm not talking to the prosecutor. I'm not dropping anything. You're going to trial, and you're going to prison. And when you're sitting in a cell at FCI Phoenix, I want you to think about Jacob and Sophie shivering in that parking lot. Please? This conversation is over. I walked away, leaving him sitting there. The desperation in his voice had been real. Good. Let him feel what Rebecca felt. Helpless, trapped, watching everything collapse. 2 days later, another development. A woman named Patricia Saunders contacted Lindsay. She was the daughter of an elderly neighbor the Walters family had befriended back in 2019. Her mother had died before she could pursue legal action, but now, seeing the news about the criminal charges, Patricia wanted to reopen the case. They convinced my mother to invest $45,000 in a real estate opportunity, Patricia told us. She was 83, had dementia. They took advantage of her, forged her signature on documents, drained her account. By the time I found out she was too sick to testify, she died thinking she'd made a bad investment, never knowing she'd been defrauded. Lindsay filed the paperwork. Another victim, another piece of evidence showing the Walters family's pattern of predatory behavior. The walls were closing in from every direction. Criminal charges, IRS liens, civil lawsuits, evictions. Everything they'd built on fraud and theft was collapsing. I sat in my office one evening looking at my caseboard. I'd started this investigation 8 weeks ago, sitting in a parking lot with my daughter sobbing in a cold van. Now, criminal charges filed, 20 counts across 3 defendants, assets frozen, $178,150 in bakery accounts, IRS liens, $94,607 in unpaid taxes, civil lawsuits pending 2, totaling over $300,000 property seizures, 1 house, 2 vehicles, multiple bank accounts, Rebecca's bakery, recovered and reopening. The Walters family had 1 asset left, their freedom, and in 3 weeks, they'd lose that too. Rebecca came into my office with coffee. She'd been working 14-hour days getting the bakery ready to reopen. Her color was better, she was sleeping through the night, and she smiled when talking about her plans. Dad, I hired 3 bakers and a front counter person. We're doing a soft opening next week. That's wonderful. And I talked to a therapist about everything. Jacob and Sophie have appointments too. She sat down. I'm getting better. Slowly. I felt a tightness in my chest, relief mixed with residual anger at what they'd put her through. You're strong, Rebecca. Stronger than you know. I learned from you. She looked at the caseboard. Is it really almost over? The trial starts in 3 weeks. After that, sentencing. Then they go to prison, and you can finally move forward without looking over your shoulder. What if they win? What if somehow? They won't win. The evidence is overwhelming. The prosecutor has emails proving premeditation, witness testimony about the conspiracy, forensic accounting showing the money laundering, physical evidence from Sean's document burning. They're going to prison, sweetheart. All 3 of them. She nodded slowly. I should feel happy about that. But mostly I just feel tired. That's normal. Trauma doesn't disappear overnight. I stood up and hugged her. But you're safe now. And in 3 weeks, this will be finished. As she left, I returned to my chessboard, actual chess this time, an online game I'd been playing intermittently. I moved my queen, putting my opponent's king in check. The Walters family had thought they were playing chess. They weren't. They'd been playing checkers while I played chess, thinking several moves ahead, anticipating their responses, preparing counter moves. And now they were in checkmate. They just didn't know it yet. The trial began on a Tuesday morning. The Maricopa County Criminal Court was packed. Reporters, curious onlookers, and a few people I recognized from the financial crimes community who'd heard about the case. The headline in the Arizona Republic read, "Family Fraud, Ring Faces Forensic Accountant's Evidence." Judge Thomas Wright was a no-nonsense jurist in his early 60s, known for harsh sentences in white-collar crime cases. Perfect. The prosecutor, James Collins, was methodical and thorough. He spent 6 hours on the first day presenting evidence, my 47-page forensic report, bank statements showing the structured withdrawals, corporate registration documents for the Shell LLCs, Jennifer Brown's eyewitness testimony about the conspiracy with Dr. Stevens, and the recorded phone calls where Tracy threatened Rebecca. I watched the Walters family throughout. Tracy sat rigid, his jaw clenched, trying to maintain composure. Doreen kept her chin up, but her hands trembled when Collins displayed the emails about the offshore accounts. Sean looked lost, glancing between his mother and brother, as if waiting for someone to tell him what to do. Their lawyer, David Powell, was overmatched and knew it. He objected half-heartedly, cross-examined witnesses ineffectively, and spent most of his time shuffling papers. On day 2, Rebecca took the stand. She wore a simple blue dress and spoke clearly despite her tears. She described the manipulation, the isolation, the moment she discovered Tracy had stolen everything. She talked about sleeping in the van with Jacob and Sophie, rationing food, being too ashamed to ask for help. I saw Tracy flinch when she described the children shivering in the cold. Good. Let him feel something. Then Collins called me as an expert witness. I walked through the money laundering scheme step by step, explaining how the Walters family had created 5 fictitious companies to drain Rebecca's bakery account, how they'd structured cash withdrawals to avoid federal reporting requirements, how they'd planned offshore accounts before they'd even stolen the money. "Mr. Cunningham," Collins asked, "in your professional opinion as a certified fraud examiner with 4 decades of experience, was this fraud scheme sophisticated?" "No," I said flatly. "It was amateur work disguised with professional-looking paperwork. They made every classic mistake. Poor record-keeping, obvious patterns in the transactions, using family members as shell company officers, and leaving a clear digital trail. Any competent investigator would unravel it within a week." "And did you unravel it?" "In 4 days." A few people in the gallery laughed. Tracy's face turned red. The defense's turn came next. Powell called Tracy to the stand. A mistake, in my opinion, but they had no other option. "Mr. Walters, can you explain the business restructuring that occurred with Sweet Haven Bakery?" Tracy tried to sound reasonable. "My wife was struggling with mental health issues. I was trying to protect our family's investment by temporarily assuming control until she recovered." Collins destroyed him on cross-examination. "Mr. Walters, you claim you were protecting the family business, yet the bakery went from profitable to nearly defunct within 4 months. Can you explain that?" "We had operational challenges. The operational challenge being that you extracted $287,000 and spent it on luxury vehicles, expensive dinners, and attempted offshore accounts." "That's not—" "You have emails, dated October of the previous year, discussing how to move money, to the Cayman Islands. 1 month before you allegedly became concerned about your wife's mental health. How do you explain that? Tracy had no answer. He sat there, mouth opening and closing, looking exactly like the trapped con artist he was. The third day brought closing arguments. Collins was devastating. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a family dispute. This is systematic financial predation. These defendants, Tracy, Doreen, and Sean Walters, conspired to steal nearly $300,000 from a young mother. They forged medical documents. They created shell companies. They structured financial transactions to evade federal reporting. They planned to hide assets offshore. And when their victim had nowhere to go, when her children were sleeping in a van in December, they felt no remorse. They felt entitled to what they'd stolen. He paused, letting that sink in. The evidence is overwhelming. The defendant's own emails prove premeditation. Bank records prove the structured transactions. Corporate filings prove the shell companies. Witness testimony proves the conspiracy. This is not a he said, she said situation. This is documented, provable criminal fraud, and these defendants deserve the maximum penalty. Powell's closing was weak, something about mistakes and misunderstandings. Nobody was buying it. Judge Wright took 2 hours to deliberate. When he returned, the courtroom went silent. Will the defendants please rise? The three of them stood. Tracy's hands were shaking. Doreen's face was ashen. Sean looked like he might be sick. Having reviewed the evidence presented in this case, including financial documents, testimony, and expert analysis, this court finds as follows. Tracy Walters, you are found guilty on all 11 counts, 7 counts of fraud, 3 counts of forgery, and 1 count of financial structuring. Doreen Walters, you are found guilty on all 5 counts, 4 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud, and 1 count of forgery. Sean Walters, you are found guilty on all 4 counts, 3 counts of fraud, and 1 count of obstruction of justice. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. I sat perfectly still, watching the Walters family's faces. Tracy's knees buckled slightly. Doreen grabbed the table for support, her legendary control finally cracking. Sean just stared straight ahead, tears running down his face. Sentencing, the judge continued. Tracy Walters, 8 years in federal prison, $150,000 in fines, full restitution of $287,340 to the victim. Doreen Walters, 4 years in prison, $75,000 in fines, joint restitution. Sean Walters, 3 years in prison, $50,000 in fines, joint restitution. Doreen fainted, actually collapsed. Bailiffs rushed to help her while paramedics were called. Tracy stood frozen, staring at nothing. Sean was openly sobbing. Rebecca grabbed my hand and squeezed. She was crying too, but these were tears of relief. I felt no joy, no triumph, just cold satisfaction. The numbers worked out. The evidence had been sufficient. Justice had been served, exactly as it should be. As they led the Walters family away in handcuffs, Tracy looked at me one last time. His expression was a mixture of hatred and broken defeat. I met his eyes and gave him the smallest nod. Checkmate. The weeks after the trial moved quickly. The Walters family was processed into the prison system. Tracy to FCI Phoenix, Doreen to the women's facility at Perryville, Sean to the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence. Their house in Scottsdale was sold at auction to pay their fines and restitution. The proceeds, combined with the frozen bakery accounts and confiscated cash, came to $411,420. Rebecca got back more than she'd lost. The IRS closed their case, satisfied with the prison sentences and asset seizures. Detective Mitchell sent me a bottle of good scotch with a note. Best forensic work I've seen in 15 years. Well done. But the real victory came in smaller moments. 3 weeks after sentencing, Rebecca and I stood in Sweet Haven Bakery as workers installed new ovens. She'd hired 4 employees, experienced bakers who'd worked at other Phoenix establishments. We'd done a complete renovation, fresh paint, new equipment, updated signage, $28,000 well spent. Dad, she said, looking around the space, I can't believe this is really happening. Believe it. You earned this. You built this business once, and you're building it again. The grand reopening happened on a bright May morning. The The line stretched around the block, partly because people wanted to support Rebecca, partly because her sourdough bread really was that good. Local news covered it. The headline, Phoenix Baker Reclaims Dream After Family Fraud Conviction. I stood in the back, watching Rebecca work. Her smile was genuine now. The fear had faded from her eyes. She laughed with customers, managed her staff confidently, and looked like herself again. Jacob and Sophie were different too. They'd started therapy, were sleeping through the night, and had friends again. Sophie had stopped asking when they'd have to leave Grandpa's house. Jacob had started playing baseball. Normal kid things. Mid-June brought the final legal milestone. Rebecca's divorce from Tracy was finalized. The judge granted her full custody of Jacob and Sophie. Tracy's parental rights were terminated due to his criminal conviction and incarceration. "How do you feel?" I asked her as we left the courthouse. "Free," she said simply. "For the first time in years, I feel free." Summer passed. The bakery thrived. Rebecca hired 2 more employees and started offering catering services. She began dating again, a teacher named Michael, who treated her with respect and made her laugh. Jacob turned 8, and we threw him a proper birthday party with 15 kids, a bounce house, and enough cake to feed an army. I went back to my routine, online chess, organizing my calculator collection, the occasional consulting job when someone needed forensic accounting work. But mostly I enjoyed being a grandfather, teaching Jacob chess, helping Sophie with her reading, being there. Late October arrived with the crisp Arizona autumn weather. Rebecca came to my house one evening with a folder. "First quarterly report," she said, spreading papers on my dining room table. "Sweet Haven Bakery, May through September." I scanned the numbers. Revenue, $147,600. Expenses, $112,930. Net profit, $34,670. "You're profitable in your first quarter," I said. "That's exceptional." "I learned from the best," she smiled. "I hired a good accountant this time. He checks everything twice." We sat on my back porch as the sun set over the Sonoran Desert. The sky turned orange and pink, that particular Arizona sunset that made everything worth it. Jacob and Sophie played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "I keep thinking about that night in the parking lot," Rebecca said quietly. "When you found us in the van. I was so ashamed, so broken. I thought my life was over. It wasn't over. It was just paused. You saved us, Dad. I don't know how to thank you for that." I looked at my daughter, healthy, successful, happy. At my grandchildren, safe, cared for, thriving. "You already thanked me. You fought back. You rebuilt. You're stronger than you were before all this happened. That's all I wanted." "What about Tracy? Do you ever think about him?" "Sometimes, but not with anger. He made choices. He paid consequences. That's justice, not revenge." She nodded. "The prosecutor told me he could be out in 6 years with good behavior. By then Jacob will be 14 and Sophie will be 12. Your business will be established. You'll be strong enough that he can't hurt you anymore." I paused. "And if he tries anything, he knows I'll be watching." She laughed. A real laugh, not a bitter one. "My forensic accountant bodyguard." "Exactly." As darkness fell, we went inside. Rebecca gathered the kids for the drive home, to her new apartment, a nice 2-bedroom place near the bakery. Safe, stable. Hers. After they left, I sat in my office one last time, looking at the caseboard I'd built months ago. All the evidence, all the connections, all the work that had taken down the Walters family fraud ring. I thought about Tracy's face in the courtroom when the verdict was read, about Doreen fainting when she heard her sentence, about Sean crying as they led him away in handcuffs. They'd thought I was too old to fight back. They'd thought a retired forensic accountant couldn't touch them. They'd counted on shame and fear keeping Rebecca silent. They'd been wrong about everything. I'd spent 40 years catching financial criminals. I knew every trick, every scheme, every mistake they'd make. And when they'd targeted my family, they'd given me every reason to use that knowledge. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is emotional, chaotic, driven by hurt. This was justice, cold, methodical, inevitable. I'd simply documented their crimes and ensured the legal system did its job. I turned off the lights in my office and checked on my antique calculator collection one more time. The 1915 comptometer sat in its place of honor, still functional after more than a century. These machines had been calculating numbers, catching errors, exposing lies for generations before computers existed. I'd done the same thing, just with modern tools. The Walters family had thought they could build a fortune on lies, but numbers don't lie, and eventually everyone has to balance the books. Justice was served. My family was safe. Life moved forward. That was all I'd ever wanted. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe to the Cold Revenge channel, as the Sweet Revenge channel will soon cease to exist. Also, share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the field on the left. Thank you for watching.